So I'm going to show you how to mix baguette dough by hand. And you start out with baguette dough doing an autolyse, and an autolyse is essentially a way to help the gluten in the dough form. And so I'm taking 72-degree water and I'm going to scale out 850 grams of it. Now into the water, I'm going to scale out what is called poolish, and poolish is a pre-ferment. And in bread baker's language, a pre-ferment is any kind of dough that's fermented before the main dough is fermented. So a sourdough starter is a pre-ferment, a poolish is a pre-ferment, a sponge is a pre-ferment. All of those things that you do ahead of time with any type of yeast are called pre-ferments. And so this poolish is equal parts flour and water with the tiniest bit of fresh yeast. And so I need 700 grams of poolish in my recipe, and what I did about 12 hours ago was I mixed 500 grams of bread flour with 500 grams of 70-degree water with approximately, I didn't even scale out the yeast, I just used a very tiny pinch of yeast. And so that ferments. You can see it's really ripe right now, and I need 700 grams. And so I'm going to scale this into my water. Great. And if you can see, this poolish is floating in the water, and that's a sign that it's well fermented because that carbon dioxide helps it to float. And so then into this I'm going to pour in 1,400 grams of all-purpose flour, and I like to use all-purpose flour instead of bread flour because the all-purpose flour helps with the fermentation. It ferments faster because the protein content isn't as high. It doesn't take as much for the yeast to feed on it. And so now I'm going to omit my salt and my yeast for the moment, and I'm going to just sort of with my hands, just these three ingredients, combine them. And you just want to hydrate the flour. I'm just going to keep my one hand free for now, and my other hand I'm just sort of using a circular motion to incorporate the ingredients. And then I'm going to sort of start to squeeze the ingredients together. I'm only using a metal bowl right now because it's wide and it's easy for me to use, but you can use any type of bowl. This makes a lot of dough. This makes about 3 kilos of dough, and so you want to use a big bowl, but it could be a ceramic bowl or any type of earthenware bowl is fine. So I just want to hydrate my flour. And it's going to be a shaggy mess when I'm done because I'm not going to knead it right now. I'm going to let it rest for about 20 to 30 minutes during an autolyse period, and during that period of time my gluten will form and it will be easier for me to finish kneading it. So this shaggy bit of dough should look just pretty much like this, and you don't have to go any further with the mixing. I'm going to clean my hand off, and then I'm going to sprinkle my 36 grams of salt right on the surface. And that sort of helps the salt to start to dissolve, but it doesn't interfere with the gluten forming process. And then I'm going to hold back my yeast. And so I'm going to let this dough sit for about 30 minutes. Okay, so our baguette dough has been resting for 20 to 30 minutes, and now we're just going to sprinkle the yeast on. And that's 8 grams of yeast. And so I'm going to use my hands to get it going, and then once I feel like the gluten has developed, I'm going to knead it on the surface of the table. Once it feels like it's not quite so sticky, I'm going to transfer it to the table. Okay, so I'm going to move it to the table. I'm going to add a little, it's sticky right now, so at this point I'm just going to get a little flour underneath just to help get it going. And now I'm going to start kneading it. And so I'm just sort of going to take my hands and I'm going to sort of rotate it as I go. And I'm going to knead it until the gluten is developed, until it passes the window pane test and is about 7 minutes. So I'm using a lot of pressure as I knead it. And I sort of want to make sure, because my salt still needs to be incorporated, so I also want to make sure that my salt is incorporating. And if it sticks to the surface, just use your bench knife to get under it and add a little bit more flour. This bread doesn't take multiple days to make. This bread you can make the same day. You need to mix your poulish the day before, but we're going to make this bread all in one day. After we're done kneading it, it will ferment for 2 hours, and then we will divide it and shape it and proof it. The proofing time on this bread is really fast. It's only about 30 minutes, and then we'll proof it and then we'll bake it. I'm going to do a window pane test right now because the autolyse has helped expedite the kneading process, so we shouldn't have to knead it terribly long. And you can see that the gluten is forming. It's really stretchy. It's partially stretchy because we added poulish, and poulish adds extensibility to the dough. And you can see we've got a really beautiful window pane going on. We probably need to knead it a little bit more, but I'm really happy with that. So we'll knead it for another minute. The window pane test basically is a check to see how the gluten is developing in the dough. And if all of the gluten is being developed, you can really stretch the dough out, because what the gluten does is it provides extensibility, i.e. stretchiness, and also elasticity. And so it's that extensibility that you're looking for in the gluten. So you're checking to see how much you can stretch the dough. So once your baguette dough is kneaded, you're going to transfer it into a lightly oiled bowl, and then it's going to ferment for a total of 2 hours, and we're going to punch it down or turn it after 1 hour. All right, so the baguette dough has fermented for 1 hour, and we're going to punch it down or turn it. And so basically I'm going to give it a letter fold. I'm going to rotate the bowl 90 degrees and fold it again like a letter, and then flip the dough upside down, and that's called turning. So you can see this has a nice extensibility to it, which is really what you want when you're making a baguette dough. It will help with our shaping. And then flip this upside down, and then I'm going to let this ferment for 1 more hour, and then we will divide and shape it. All right, so the baguette dough has fermented for a total of 2 hours with a turn at 1 hour. And so now we're going to divide the dough. And so we're going to lightly dust our surface, scrape the dough out onto our surface. And so I'm going to shape this dough into 2 different shapes. I'm going to show you how to shape a traditional French baguette, and then I'm going to show you how to shape demi baguettes, which are smaller, about half the size, and fit more easily into your oven at home. So for the French baguette, I'm going to divide the dough into 300-gram pieces. And for the demi baguettes, I'm going to use half that weight, so I'm going to divide it into 150-gram pieces. You can always eyeball this, but for me, as a baker, weight really matters, both when you're scaling out your recipe, just in terms of consistency, and then also when you're dividing, so things look more consistent. If you find yourself making the same sourdough recipe or the same baguette dough recipe, and you've become so comfortable with it that you can just sort of eyeball the weights of things and you know what the dough feels like, then by all means you don't need to weigh anything out. But for me, consistency is really important, and so I always weigh everything out, from the ingredients to the scaling of the dough right before I shape it. Great. All right, so when I'm dividing, now that these are divided, I'm going to pre-shape them. And pre-shaping is the step right before shaping, and you're pre-shaping so that you can get an even and consistent final shape. That's all. So if you're shaping it into a ball, you really don't need to do a pre-shape. But when you're shaping it into a long baguette, you want that baguette to be even, and so you want to do some type of pre-shape so that the final shape is even. So the first thing I do is I take a breadboard here, and you could also use your kitchen counter or just something that you can flour and let the bread sit on it for about 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm just going over the board with some flour, and now I'm going to take my baguette piece and I'm going to roll it up like I'm making a log. And that's all that I'm doing with this pre-shape, is I'm rolling it up and I'm making a log, and that will become my final baguette shape. I'm not putting a lot of tension on this, although you could, but I'm just sort of rolling it out just so it's nice and even. Now, for the demi baguettes, my pre-shape is a round, and so I'm going to round this dough. And so again, I'm flouring my hands because this is a little sticky, and that's okay. I'm going to take against the surface that I'm working on and sort of round and use that friction to create a nice ball. And I'm going to work 2 at a time. And then these balls are going to rest along with the baguette oblongs for about 20 minutes, and we're letting them rest because we want the gluten to relax. And you might find as a beginning baker that your dough is already soft enough or relaxed enough for you to shape it into a baguette, and that's great. Really, for a professional baker who puts a lot of tension in the dough, you need to let that gluten relax before you can do the final shape. The rolling here, for example, is really working the gluten. And so if I tried to shape this into something else right now, I wouldn't be able to, so I need to let it relax. So that's dividing and pre-shaping baguette dough. We're going to let this relax and we'll come back to it in about 20 minutes. So I'm going to show you how to shape a baguette, and then I'm going to show you how to shape demi baguettes. So I've moved all of my pieces of dough onto my board so I would have some more space, but you don't necessarily need to. I've got myself set up, so I've got a row of flour right in front of me. I've got my workspace where I'm going to shape my baguette. I've got my bench knife, which is really important in shaping. And then I've got what is called a couche, which is a French word. It's a verb. It means coucher, which means to sleep. And basically, I've rolled this couche up, and I'm going to proof my baguette on this couche. And it's just going to sort of let my bread proof and rest, and it sort of helps support my bread so it doesn't go slack when it's proofing. So I've got my couche set up right over here on a board. And this couche is about 26 inches long. You could easily substitute. This is a linen kitchen towel, and it's somewhat sturdy, and this is an easy substitute if you aren't able to find the linen available. So I'm going to start shaping my baguette dough, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to deflate it just a little bit with a little smack. And you don't have to really deflate it because we did knead it by hand. And then I'm going to take a piece of my dough and I'm going to fold it over itself like I'm making a letter fold, only this time I'm going to use my thumb and my hand, and I'm going to push the dough forward, sort of like you're pushing forward parallel to your work surface. And that is going to create this little bit of tension like this. And then from that point forward, I'm going to roll and seal with the palm of my right hand. And I'm going to roll. See, I'm rolling it and I'm sealing it. And I'm going to go back over it and I'm going to do it one more time. And see, that has formed a seam on the bottom. And so at this point, I have my initial shape. I'm going to roll my baguette out. I'm going to flour my hands a little bit so it doesn't stick to me. And I'm just start in the center, and I'm going to work in the center, and I'm going to work my way out. So start in the center and then work your way out like that. And so that is a shaped baguette. I'm going to put a little flour down on my couche so the baguette doesn't stick to it. I'm going to make sure that the seam is on the bottom of the couche, and then I'm just going to fold the couche up just a little bit like that. And now I have a spot for my next baguette. And so this next baguette, I'm going to shape faster so you can see what it looks like in sort of like real time. So deflate, fold over and out, and then seal. And then roll it out. And the rolling out is really helping to even it out too. And then you're going to just put it in the flour, put it on the couche, and then fold the couche up. And now to shape the demi baguettes, these are rounds. And so the way I shape these is first I deflate it a little bit, then I make a letter fold like this. And then I'm going to bring the two top ends of my rectangle down to the center to form a triangle. And then I'm going to take the top of that triangle down, and now I'm going to just sort of roll it out, and as I roll it out, I'm going to taper the ends. And then I'm going to dip it in the flour, and then I'm going to make sure that I dust this a little bit. I'm going to put my demi baguettes right here. And demi baguettes are a great way when you don't have a lot of space in your home bread oven. If the baguette isn't going to fit, like these will be a tight fit in this bread oven, but you can easily fit multiple demi baguettes in your bread oven. So I'm going to do a letter fold. Then I'm going to bring the two top corners down to make a triangle. I'm going to take the top down all the way to the bottom, and then I'm going to roll it out, and I'm going to taper the ends. I'm going to bring my couche up a little bit, and I'm going to keep going. Okay, this is the last demi baguette. I'm going to quickly shape it. I'm going to put it on the floured couche. And then what I like to do sometimes if I have a little extra fabric is I like to sort of pull the fabric over the bread to sort of keep it from drying out and prevent a skin from forming on it. So we're going to let this dough proof for about 30 to 45 minutes. So now I'm going to show you how to bake the demi baguettes. The demi baguettes have been proofing for about 45 minutes. And I'm just going to take the cover off of them. I'm going to do a quick little test right like this. And that, when the dough doesn't spring back like that, to me that means that the dough is proofed. And so for these demi baguettes, I'm going to use a wooden pizza peel, and I'm going to dust the surface of the peel with rice flour. And the reason why I'm using rice flour is because it's a little bit more coarse than regular flour, and it doesn't get absorbed into the dough, so it's a great sliding mechanism to use to get the dough into the oven without the dough sticking on the peel. And these are small little breads, so I'm just going to use the palm of my hands, and I'm going to take the edge of the cloth and I'm going to flip them into the palms of my hands upside down, and I'm going to flip it over right side up, and I'm going to do that with the other demi baguettes. So once I have these on the peel, what I do is I quickly straighten them out with my hands, and then I'm going to score them, and I'm going to use my lame, and I'm going to do 2 scores, and I'm going to hold the lame at about a 45-degree angle to create the scores. And I'm going to hold on to the bread while I'm scoring. And now I'm going to take my cup of water and put it into the broiler pan. And that just creates a nice bit of steam. And now I'm going to load my bread directly onto the pizza peel. And then I'm going to spritz the bread with some more steam. And what I'll do is set the timer for 5 minutes and continue spritzing within that 5-minute period of time. And now I'm going to check on the demi baguettes. They've been in the oven for about 23 minutes, and I'm going to check on them. They're also ready to come out of the oven. They're a great, beautiful brown. And I'm just going to set them on the counter to cool down. And that's how you make demi baguettes.